Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with massive drone and missile strike that took place during the previous night. I'll remind you that the Russians struck back. There were lots of explosions, lots of attacks. The missiles and drones were spotted in the area of Odessa, Zaporozhye, Pavlograd, and there were lots of drones and lots of missiles in the area of the city of Kiev. Let's take a look at the Minister of Defense of Ukraine report. Ukrainians reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to bring the Russians launched around 250 drones, and the Ukrainians managed to bring down up to 245. Furthermore, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians launched 14 Iskander missiles, and 6 of them Ukrainians managed to bring down. So these are the numbers that were provided by the Ukrainian sources, and later we got additional details what exactly the Russians were trying to attack during the previous night. And according to information we have, the Russians were trying to damage and to destroy the northwestern part of the city of Kiev. We are talking about the industrial area. This is the Antonov plan. This is the Antonov plan that Ukrainians were using or are using to create drones. I'd remind you that during the period of time between the 20th of May and the 23rd of May of 2025, the Ukrainians carried out their own massive drone strike all over the entire territory of the Western Russia. There were lots of explosions, and the most important, there are two important things. First of all, the Ukrainians used more than 1,000 drones, and most likely a huge batch of these drones were produced exactly on this Antonov plant. Another important thing is that Ukrainians managed to get to the capital of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow. So the Russians today strike back with the purpose to destroy these military facilities. In these pictures, we can see the consequences of Russian counterattack. Lots of explosions. The Russians managed to deal damage, obviously, and later we got another picture, satellite picture. We're talking about this, and according to this picture we can see a very huge fire anomaly exactly in this area. So basically the Russians managed to reduce this territory to ruins, as we can see according to photos, according to satellite proofs, and many other different evidences. Anyway, today we got another very important video, this one that was published by some Ukrainian, by some civilian from the city of Kiev, and in this video we can see exactly the period of time when the Russians were bombing and attacking the capital of Ukraine. And the most important, during this video we can see how Ukraine air defense system was working. So in this video we can see the work of Ukrainian air defense Patriot system. So, and the most important part of this video is not how Ukrainians were repelling Russian attacks. The most important part of this video is this one. Just this is it. So as you can see just a second ago, exactly from this area the Ukrainians were launching missiles. So air defense system of Ukraine was located exactly in this part, and a few seconds later after Ukraine's launched missiles there was a very heavy explosion. And later the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that during the previous night the Russians attacked military facilities that Ukrainians were using to produce drones, and that the Russians attacked the area of Ukraine air defense system with Patriots. So as of the end of the 24th of May of 2025, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to destroy any of these air defense systems, but most likely they were damaged or something like this, because we can see these fire anomalies and these proofs with huge damage the Russians managed to deal. So we understand that the Ukrainians most likely suffered huge losses in the sphere of air defense and in the sphere of drone production. So this is it, and now let's talk about the situation on the ground, because today we got lots of crazy updates. And first let's talk about the northern directions. Let's talk about the city of Tyotkina, where the Ukrainians, probably the second or the week in a row, trying to break through Russian defense and to answer the central part of the settlement. Today, several mappers reported that Ukrainians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions in the most southwestern part of this settlement and to take under control everything that is located to the west of these railways. So as for now, the Ukrainians most likely haven't managed to cross the railways and to improve their positions on the Russian side, but obviously if they will try to do this in the very near future. Now let's talk about the Sumy direction. We got lots of important updates. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the units of the Group of Forces North managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Lochnia. So this is very important piece of news. The battle for Lochnia started probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was a very difficult battle, as we can see, and today, by the 24th of May, the Russians managed to secure this territory completely. The most important thing is that the village of Lochnia and the village of Yunakivka has almost no gap. So there is no gap between these villages. So basically, the fall of village of Lochnia means the beginning of the battle for the settlement of Yunakivka. As for the end of the 24th of May of 2025, we still haven't received anything that can confirm the presence of the Russian units in the northern part of Yunakivka. But if this still hasn't happened, obviously this is going to happen in the very near future. The Russians will continue their offensive operation, and the village of Yunakivka is the primary target for the Russians at this stage of the special military operation. Let's finish the northern direction with the Kharkiv area. Today we got lots of very interesting statements, lots of very interesting articles. So let's discuss them in details. And this is the first article. Kharkiv, why Russian troops are massing near Ukraine's fortress city. That was stated and asked by the Sky News. Sky News reports that Russia is massing troops along the border with Kharkiv region. Following the securing of Kursk region, over 50,000 Russian troops have been concentrated near Kharkiv. Analysts believe a large-scale offensive has been in preparation for some time and could begin soon, with an estimated 4 months window before weather conditions become less favorable. Ukrainian commander admitted that Russia is clearly preparing for offensive operation. Furthermore, we got another very interesting statement that was made by the deputy commander of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, ex-Azov, Maxim Zhorin. We can already prepare for the battles for Kharkiv and Sumy. There will be no buffer zone. There will be already their territories. So the Russians do not even hide that they plan to advance further. So as you can see, the Russians are preparing something in this area. And if you remember, during the May, we've talked lots about the situation. We discussed the situation in the vicinity of the settlement of Zhuravka. There were lots of videos published by the Ukrainian, by the Russian sources, how Russian convoys were moving in this area along the border, how the Russians were massing in this area. So now we have no doubts that something big is going to happen, both on the western and in the eastern flank of the Kharkiv direction. When talking about the western flank, the Russians will continue offensive operation using these routes of attack. As for the eastern flank, the Russians will continue the battle for the settlement of Volchansk with the purpose to finish this battle completely. We're not saying, and I'm telling the truth, I'm not sure that the commander of 3rd Brigade is correct saying that the Russians are going to move with the purpose to take Kharkiv, because 50,000 troops is not enough to take the city of Kharkiv. You need at least 2 or maybe 300,000 soldiers. You need to encircle the city, you need to cut supply and support, so only then you will be able to do something. Kharkiv is million with population with over 1 million, and so it's going to be very difficult task. But the Russians will try to improve their positions along the border. They will take every single settlement probably in 10 kilometers or 10-20 kilometers from the border in the direction or deep inside of Ukraine. As for the city of Volchansk, the Russians continue their offensive, and the Russians started offensive operation here a long time ago, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. The Russians, during this period of time, the Russians improved their positions in the city of Volchansk itself in the northern part. There are very heavy clashes for these forests. The Russians destroyed the bridges and logistic in this area, so everything is ready, at least from this side, for another full-scale offensive operation. And as for this direction, the Russians have several tasks. The first one is to finish the battle of Volchansk, and the second task is to move as deep as possible, obviously with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Byle Kolodezi. So this is going to be probably the primary target for the Russians at the first stage, and then the Russians will see whether they're able to move further, or this is the only thing they can do. Anyway, we need to understand that the Russians would advance and from the southeastern direction, from the river Voskol, in the same direction, and probably with the purpose to unite, to connect two forces, two groups, and then together to move further in the southeast western directions to the village of Balaklia that used to be under Russian control in 2022. So everything is possible, because once again Sooner or later, the Russians will try to begin the battle for Slaviansk, and obviously, to attack Slaviansk, the best solution for the Russians is to control the city of Izium with its railways and supply lines between Kharkiv and the city of Slaviansk. So lots of things the Russians need to do before the battle for the final settlements of the Donbass of Donetsk region. Now let's talk about the situation around the village of Redkodub. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional reports. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the eastern part of the village. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 23rd of May of 2025. The Russians controlled just the most eastern part of the settlement, but by the end of the 24th of May, the Russians managed to secure the entire eastern part of Redkodub. As for the situation during the previous day, we haven't received anything regarding additional progress. These updates we discussed already during the previous video, so as you can see, during the previous day, nothing special. Obviously, there are very heavy clashes, and the Russians will try to take this village as soon as possible. Because the Russians are about to begin the battle for Leman, so that is why everything is already ready. Today we got very interesting video published from the road between the city of Leman and the city of Slaviansk. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were trying to move from one side of the river of Siversk to another, but the Russians destroyed the only bridge in this area. So now we see that Ukrainian logistic collapsed, or at least logistic has some problems. This area was damaged and destroyed. Now the Ukrainians need to think how to support and supply their forces around the city of Leman. Another important thing is that if this bridge was destroyed, so we believe that we need to expect another full-scale offensive operation from the Russian side with the purpose to improve their positions and to get as close as possible to the city of Leman itself. Obviously, the battle for Leman is going to be very difficult. This time, the Ukrainians will be prepared. Obviously, there is a huge force behind the city of Leman, most likely very entrenched and very reinforced area. The Ukrainians most likely will build lots of pontoon bridges with the purpose to support their contingent in this area. The Ukrainians wasn't prepared for the battle for Leman in 2022. Now let's wait and see what they're able to do right now. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the city of Siversk. We see that the Russians intensify their activities. We have already discussed several videos from this area. Once again, let's take a look at them. In this video that was published yesterday in the evening, we can see how the Russians managed to establish complete FPV drone control over this supply line. In this video, we can see how the Russians managed to discover positions or some equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this area. This is a very important video, and the value of this video is, first of all, that the Russians established complete control over one of the most important supply lines that goes from the city of Siversk in the northern directions to the settlement of Serebryanka. So this line is under complete Russian control. And during the day, we were waiting for additional proofs that the Russians control the situation completely. And this video was also published today. And here we can see almost the same story. The Russian drone was flying above this road, trying to discover positions and equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine, and when another point was discovered, another temporary deployment point was discovered, the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory. So now we have at least two videos from this area that prove Russian control over this supply line. And if we increase the numbers of days, let's say since the beginning of May, we're going to receive additional video from this area. Here we can see the same story. A Russian drone was flying along another supply line, and the Russians were damaging and destroying Ukrainian equipment, Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian supply and support, Ukrainian probably temporary deployment points with drones. Several episodes was located and geolocated exactly in this point. So as you can see, this is another supply line that goes from the city of Siversk in the northern directions towards the settlement of Serebryanka. Another important thing is that during the same period of time, we got video from the most northwestern part of the city of Siversk. We discussed this video a few days ago on the 21st of May, and here we can see how Russians were destroying vehicles and tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that were moving in the direction of the city of Siversk. So this attack, as you can see, took place along this supply line. So now we have enough of proofs to make a conclusion that the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the most northern part of the city of Siversk, where we can see at least 3 supply lines that go in the direction of Serebryanka. Some of of them goes in the direction of the city of Siversk itself, which means that the Russians are entering the final stage of preparation before the beginning of the final, let's say, part of the battle for the northeastern part of the Siversk foothold. We are talking about Grigorovka and Serebryanka villages. So during the next several days, we are waiting for additional changes on the ground in Russian favor. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the settlement of Kostyantynivka, because probably during the previous 24 hours the most important updates are coming exactly from this area, more precisely to the west of the village of the city of Kostyantynivka. Another village was taken by the Russians, and this is not just a village, this is probably the most important village in this area. We are talking about the settlement by the name of Stupochky. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of offensive operation, the units of the group of forces South managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Stupochky. Based on this report that was provided by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map by coloring every single square kilometer in this area in Russian favor. So this is very important because now the Russians managed to shorten the distance between the city of Kostyantynivka itself and edge Russian positions for less than 5 kilometers, which is already nothing. This is the first thing. Another thing, we have lots of geolocations exactly in this area. For example, in this video we can see how Russians were attacking the next probably temporary deployment point on N32 road. Probably this is already something like the beginning of the city of Kostyantynivka itself, like outskirts of the settlement. So here the Russians attack these facilities and this building. This is very important video. Another interesting videos, a few more interesting videos came from the village of Pritiechina. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the position of Ukraine mortar system, 120mm mortar system, and then the Russians destroyed this area with artillery strike. A bit further to the north we can see another temporary deployment point of Ukraine that was bombed by Russian FPV drone. So we see a huge concentration of Russian activities in this area, which means that most likely the Russians are going to attack in the western direction and the southwestern direction with the purpose to most likely establish complete control over this territory. If the Russians are able to secure this territory, this is going to be the beginning of huge disaster for the Ukrainians, not just for the settlement of Kostyantynivka, but also for Ukrainian positions in this pocket, because from the village of Pritiechina, most likely the Russians first of all will try to attack in the southern direction, basically from behind Ukrainian positions in the village of Alexandra Shultina and Bila Gora, trying to encircle the Ukrainians in this pocket, or at least to force them to fall back. So we expect that everything will, the situation will speed up in this area, and during the next probably several weeks we're going to receive lots of updates exactly from this area. So this is the situation. Very important village. Once again, the village of Stupochky was secured and taken by the Russians today. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the village of Yablunivka and in the direction of the village of Alexandra Shultina. So now we see, if we zoom out a bit, we can see that the Russians are trying to advance like pincers, like from the southwest and from the northeast in the direction of Kostyantynivka itself, trying to encircle Ukrainian positions inside of this pocket. So something big and some big disaster may happen for the Ukrainians in this area, of course, if they are not prepared. Obviously the Ukrainians were preparing themselves during the previous let's say months or weeks, and now it's just a question of corruption, whether the corruption allowed the Ukrainians to create necessary fortifications or not. Anyway, the Russians continue offensive, and during the previous 24 hours they managed to improve their positions, and we have a proof. In this video published by the Ukrainian site, we can see how the infantry fighting vehicle of the armored force of the Russian Federation was attacked and damaged and destroyed by Ukrainian FPV drone. This episode was geolocated exactly along this tree line, and based on this video we have adjusted the map, and we have shortened the gap between the Ukrainian positions and Russian positions for several fields and tree lines. So we see that the Russians continue their offensive here, and we expect additional changes on the ground exactly from this area. Now let's talk about the situation along N32 road. Today we got another change on the ground. According to notable mappers, the Russians improved their positions. Very important progress. But telling the truth, right before we started making this video, we got another proof published by the Ukrainian side how a Russian vehicle was moving on the southern part of Popy Yar. Ukrainians destroyed Russian vehicle somewhere in this point, which means that we have every proofs to color territory to the south. So we will analyze this video in detail, trying to understand how exactly the Russians answered the village of Popov Yar through the, let's say, southwest eastern direction or through the southwestern, to understand what kind of sectors, areas should be colored in Russian favor. So tomorrow we're going to have some changes exactly from to the south from Popov Yar. We have proofs about this. Furthermore, the Russians, according to information we have, captured the village of Malinovka completely. This was published by very reliable sources, but not with the Minister of Defense or somewhere else. As of now, we are not changing anything, but we are waiting for additional changes in the very near future, like 2-3 days, and obviously something is going to be colored here. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, where the Russian offensive is gaining momentum. The most important video is coming from the settlement of Bohdanivka. Here we can see how the Russians, or several Russian soldiers, established Russian flags all over the entire village. And based on this video, we haven't colored anything because the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported about Russian control with this territory a few days ago. But now we have no doubts that the report of the Minister of Defense was correct and was complete. A true report. Anyway, the Russians managed to take this village, and now the Russians have no barriers to move further in the southwestern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Alexeyevka. When talking about the settlement of Alexeyevka, we have reports that the Russians are advancing from the village of Bohdanivka. During the previous 48 hours, the Russians managed to take under complete control the village of Odradne. We have proofs, so we have video published by the Russian sources, also with Russian soldiers with many flags raised in many different parts of the settlement. Today we got reports that the Russians improved their positions further in the northwestern direction, and that the Russians managed to get the river of Volcha almost from the south. So now the Russians are ready to attack and outflank the village of Alexeyevka from the southwest as well. And the most important video was published to the east of Alexeyevka from this dense network of fortifications. Here we can see how the units of the 46th Brigade were bombing and attacking Russians in this area. Lots of episodes, and several of them were geolocated exactly among these trenches and fortifications. So now we see that the Russians began another major or full-scale offensive operation in the direction of Alexeyevka, at least from 3 directions: from the southwest, from the northeast, and from the east. So as for now, the Russians are too far to the settlement itself, so obviously they're gonna need 2, 3, 4 days or 5 days to get as close as possible to tighten the news, and obviously this will lead to the situation when the Ukrainians will be forced to make a very difficult decision, either to fall back from the village of Alexeyevka or to stay there, but to stay there most likely forever. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Gulay-Polye direction. The Russians continue offensive operation. The sources reported almost complete control over 2 villages, the village of Zelene Polye and the village of Nadiivka. Novopol. Most likely during the next days, the Russians will take these territories under complete control, and we're going to receive additional proof from the Minister of Defense. Another important thing is that today another exchange process finished. This is very important. On the 24th of May, in accordance with the Russian-Ukrainian agreements reached on the 16th of May in Istanbul, another 307 Russian servicemen have been returned from the territory controlled by Ukraine. Another important thing that the Ukrainians got the same. So this is the second post. So this is the second swap of posts, and the total number of exchange of posts that were swapped between the parties already more than 600, which means that probably there are 1 or 2 batches left to finish the process completely. And when it happens, the Russians promise they will provide real drafts, real papers, real document with Russia's demands to finish the special military operation. So the Russians reported that everything is ready from their side, that in the coming days Russia will hand over to Kyiv its developments within the framework of a memorandum on settlement. Work on the document is in the final stage, said the Vice Speaker of the Federation Council of the Russian Federation, Konstantin Kosachev. So during the next 2-3 days, 4 days, we're going to receive the final demands, not the final, probably the fresh or latest demands of the Russians to settle the conflict peacefully, and which will allow the Russians and the Ukrainians to complete this bloodshed or something like this. So then the Ukrainians will have a make to decision to accept Russian terms or not. But obviously, Ukrainians, if they accept these demands, they would be forced to return or to give the Russians some territories. Most likely, Ukraine will not accept these demands, and the Russians will begin their full-scale summer offensive operation. And that's it for the today military summary channel. Reminds you can condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.